He's heard it all before. You're a pastor. You're not supposed to get political. You shouldn't be talking about these issues, so just stay out of politics and stick to preaching the gospel. Life, marriage, sexuality, borders, ethnicity. These things aren't political. They're biblical. God's word has much to say about the culture we're living in. This is Our Watch with Tim Thompson.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Our Watch. I am Tim Thompson, Senior Pastor of 412 Church in the Temecula Valley. Glad to be with you on this Sunday. Really excited about what we're going to do today. Normally, I'm with Pastor Jake Porter. We go verse by verse, chapter by chapter in the Word of God. Today, we've got a little something special for you, something a little out of the norm, and that is we've got Bill Federer with us, and he's going to be giving you a historical message, a biblical message. This man is a man of great wisdom and great knowledge, and I think of Edmund Burke, who says, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. This is a man who's bringing history and the Word of God to us in a way that is incredible. It's informative. It's going to change the way you think. So very excited to introduce my good friend, historian, Christian, William Federer. Here he is.
I wanted to jump into how to brainwash a nation. And so the idea is your spirit and you live inside of a body. So your spirit loves God, your body is drawn away from God, and the mind is the battlefield. And so it's the battle for the mind. And the military strategist, Karl von Clausewitz, in the 19th century, gave the classic definition of the purpose of war. The purpose of war was to force your opponent to submit to your will. Pretty simple. You go through all this weapons and battlefield strategy and all this, but if the goal is to get your opponent to submit to your will. And so Sun Tzu's Art of War says that supreme excellence in a commander is to get your enemy to surrender without a fight. The idea is that if you can make your enemy discouraged or confused or demoralized, or you can make yourself look bigger than you really are, but it's sort of a mind game. And if the goal is to get him to submit to your will, well, if you can get him to submit without a fight, that's even better. Well, now it's called fifth generation warfare, where you get your enemy to surrender without them even being aware they're in a war. If the goal is to get them to submit to your will, what if you could get them to submit without even a fight, without even them even knowing they're in a war? I mean, what could be better than that? So it's called psychological operations. And we did it during World War II, dropping pamphlets on German villages saying, your side is already lost. Your commanders just haven't told you yet. And they're out there fighting. I read we already lost. Right? It would demoralize them. And the Japanese did it to us with Tokyo Rose. Right? She had this seductive voice, and the radio waves would go across the Pacific Ocean to our ships, and it would be, you Americans are terrible, and it would demoralize our guys. Well, it's in the Bible, this psychological warfare. Imagine you have the 12 spies go into the promised land, 10 come back with what? A negative report. We're not able to take the land, they're too strong for us. The land devours the inhabitants thereof, that we're like grasshoppers, and they were defeated in their mind. These 10 spies came back and they spread this negative report, and it went boom through the entire nation of Israel. And they said, let's stone Moses and go back to Egypt. That quick. They were defeated in their mind before they ever got to the battlefield, right? So the battle is for our mind. Now, you look at the story of Hezekiah, and Assyria comes, and they're, have these ambassadors speaking out, and the Jews send negotiators out. And they're like, speaking the Assyrian language, we understand that. And the Assyrian king says, no, I want all the people on the walls to hear, and you're going to have this terrible thing happen and this terrible thing, and don't listen to Hezekiah. And it's like, what's the deal? He wants to demoralize the people. So we're not just talking about a military armies, we're talking about part of this strategy is to go to your entire population and demoralize them and get them to be willing to give up. That's why they want to make it look like something is really bad. The moment that you have some fear sweep across and every news station is talking about it and it looks really, really bad, you need to not make a decision in that moment of fear, right? Because if you wait and trust the Lord, then it gradually, you'll realize that you're having a trick played on you, and then you start coming back, hey, God's in control, right? Part of this psychological warfare is they want to get you into fear, discouraged, demoralized, disoriented, distracted, divided. And what does God's word say? Fear not, fear ye not, fear thou not, fear them not, fear them not. You shall not fear, neither shall you fear, neither fear no evil. My heart shall not fear. Over and over again, God says, fear not. You make your decisions out of faith, not out of fear. And so the devil wants to try to attack on the outside, but if he can't defeat on the outside, the attitude is, well, if you can't beat them, join them, and then deceive and weaken them from within. And this was called fifth column warfare. Fifth column warfare. What's that about? The ancient warfare would have columns, 2 columns and then 2 flanks. But fifth column warfare is where you would have one of your people in the enemy's camp, sowing division, demoralizing them, confusing them, and they would be weakened from the inside. And so that went into our vernacular. The Alexander the Great's dad was Philip of Macedon, and he conquered Thebes and Amphipolis, where they had gold mines, and he had this gold, and he would bribe citizens of Athens with money under the table. Athens didn't have a king. It was a democracy. So all the people would gather together in the marketplace, and they would be like, we got to get our walls going. Philip's coming. We got to get our army up to speed. Philip's coming. And these paid traders would stand up and say, wait, just let's not get carried away. I hear Philip's not such a bad guy. I hear he's not conquering these cities, he's liberating them. And these paid propagandists would gather around themselves people that believe the lies, who were later called useful idiots. Right? They'd get out there, you see them on the street holding their signs, and they'd be like, why are you protesting, Gaza? It's like, I don't know, from river to the sea. Well, what river to what sea? It's like, I don't know. I mean, they're like idiots, but they would follow the people that are being paid to betray. Now, Cicero spoke to the Roman Senate, 42 BC. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and he carries his banners openly against the city. But the traitor moves among those within the gates freely. His sly whispers, heard in the very halls of government, he works secretly to undermine the pillars of a city. He infects the body politic so that they can no longer resist. A murderer is less to be feared. And so we have this strategy that goes all the way back in history of a country and people coming on the inside that are being betrayed to want to betray the country. And so during World War II, we were becoming aware of these infiltrators during the Cold War. And interestingly enough, this is the Muslim Brotherhood strategy. They did the infiltration tactics. So France built the Suez Canal. And in the 1880s, it was taken over by the British. And so you had 6 fundamentalist Muslim employees of the British-run Suez Canal Company, and they formed the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. Their goal was radical. Allah is our objective. Quran is our constitution. Death for the sake of Allah is the highest of our aspirations. And the Muslim Brotherhood helped start these different terrorist groups, the PLO, Taliban, Hamas, and everything. And the Muslim Brotherhood based its strategy on the 2 cities Muhammad lived in, Mecca and Medina. In Mecca, Muhammad was a religious leader. In Medina, he becomes a political and a military leader. And so the Muslim Brotherhood says, let's let this be our strategy. Infiltrate pro-Western countries, pretending to be a religious Muslim. And then when you get in and you get into positions of power, you flip and come out of the closet as a political and military Muslim, and you do assassinations and take over neighborhoods and so forth. And so the head of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1960s was Sayyid Qutb. He was called like the godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood, and he influenced all these other terrorist groups. And so what did they do? They infiltrated Jordan. Jordan had a moderate leader, King Abdullah. Well, guess what? They had him assassinated on the Temple Mount in 1951. And then you have Anwar Sadat was the leader of Egypt. And he made a treaty with Israel, Menachem Begin. And everybody in the world's thrilled. We got the Muslims and the Jews making a treaty. Billy Graham praised Anwar Sadat for making a treaty with Israel. Pat Robertson praised Anwar Sadat for making a treaty with Israel. It's looking good, except the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated people infiltrated the Egyptian military. And they're having a parade. And as the military is going in front of the bandstands and Anwar Sadat is there watching, a bunch of the soldiers stop, turn with their machine guns, and they kill Anwar Sadat. They had infiltrated the military, and then they did this assassination. So this idea of infiltration, the socialists did it. So after World War I, you had and then World War II, you had Stalin, and they're wanting to fight America and the West with tanks. And this guy, Antonio Gramsci, said, you'll never defeat the West with tanks. You have to rot them from within. You have to infiltrate. It's going to take some time. It's called the long march through the institutions. And you got to rot everything about the West. And so he said, socialism is precisely the religion which must overwhelm Christianity. And James Wardner wrote in 1996, Unholy Alliances, in the New Order, talking about Gramsci, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, that's that woke religion, and the media, transforming the consciousness of society. And so it's called the 7 pillars of influence, or the 7 mountains of influence, that the Christians controlled every one of them, right? From the beginning of the country, education. You had the public school system was all Protestant, the parochial school system was Catholic, but it was all Bible-based, right? You had media. There was a Baptist group in Hollywood, and they would review every movie during production. When Cecil B. DeMille would be doing his movies, there'd be this guy, and he'd be sitting in a chair on the set, and Cecil B. DeMille would having, maybe a risque scene, and he'd look over at the guy, and the guy would be like, no, and the guy would say, okay, Cecil B. DeMille, we got to redo this scene, until he gave him the thumbs up. Because if he didn't, at the beginning of the movie, when they'd run all the credits, you'd see a big stamp. And if it didn't have that approval, then none of the Christians, in 1965, 93% of Americans identified themselves as Christian. 1965. And but what's happened is we've pulled back. We've bought into this pietism, this separation of church and state concept. When the early church started, you had people meeting in catacombs and in caves, and then finally, after 3 centuries, Constantine legalized Christianity, great. And then you had heresies, not great. And so then they would have conferences to settle them, like the Council of Nicaea and so forth. But then in 379 AD, you had a Roman emperor who was Christian named Theodosius, and he outlawed paganism. And so now you have all these pagans flooding into the church and nominally being Christians. And so a revival movement starts called pietism. They said being a Christian is more than doctrine, even if it's a good doctrine. You have to have an experience with Jesus. And people would have an experience, and they'd be so excited to have a personal experience with Jesus, they would withdraw and give away all their money and live in a cave as a hermit, or give away their money and join a monastery and take vows of silence. They'll just enjoy their own personal relationship, but it would be like off the cliff. They wouldn't care what kind of country they're leaving their kids. And so the Christians had all these areas of influence in America, but this pietist type teaching said, no, if you're really spiritual, you'll withdraw. Well, gee, if all the Christians withdraw, who's left to be involved but the non-Christians? And guess what they're going to push? And so the socialism infiltration. In 1963, Albert Herlong, congressman from Florida, reads into the congressional record the 45 tactics the communists have to take over America. One was infiltrate the press. Another is infiltrate the churches and replaced revealed religion with social religion. That's where the social justice came from. Infiltrate and gain control of unions, infiltrate and gain control of big business. We always thought business on one side, government on the other, and other. Well, guess what? About 10, 15 years ago, you had index funds at BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and they would invest in everything on the stock market, so it would be safe investment, and they just take advantage of the gradual rising of it. And when you own some stock in your retirement portfolio, you're not going to go to a stockholder meeting, for Exxon or something. And so you check the little proxy box, which allows the index company to go to the stockholder meeting and cast a vote in your place. Well, guess what? These big index funds show up and they have thousands of proxy votes, and they basically dictate to the country. And guess what? These are all run by leftists, critical race theory, pro-transgendered, pro-China, whatever, and they've co-opted big business. 80% of the S&P 500 companies controlling interest in the stock is owned by BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. We always thought Coke and Pepsi were competitors. Look who owns them, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. We always thought Nestle and General Mills were competitors. Who owns them? BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. They own pharmaceutical companies and media companies. Anyway, that was not my talk today, but somebody needed to hear that. And so capture one or both of the political parties, right? Get the rhinos in there. Gain control of key positions, radio, TV. Get control of teachers association. Put party line in textbooks. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and communist propaganda. Now, this is where it gets interesting. They infiltrated marketing. So, marketing in the 1800s was what? Wells Fargo wagon and Sears catalog. And they would list everything about a sewing machine, and you would make an informed purchase. But then in the early 1900s, they began to have magazine ads, and they would say nothing about a product. They would just make it look like everybody's using it, and they're happy. And the classic was Crisco. Nobody knew what was in Crisco. But they marketed it so well, it put out of business the lard industry, right? And you know what's in Crisco? Cottonseed oil. In the Deep South, they would harvest cotton, and they would have big mountains of these black seeds that they would mush into this black industrial seed oil that they would use in machines and factories. Nobody ate that stuff, but somebody had the idea of bleaching it and putting these containers, and we've all ingested it. So you go from knowing everything about a sewing machine to nothing about a product. They even invented the word vegetable-based, right? You go from knowing everything about a sewing machine to nothing about a product, and you're eating it. And so it's called keeping up with the Joneses. And so they realize that people will buy something even though they know nothing about it if they see other people with it. We're a government from the consent of the governed. But what if you could engineer consent? What if you could use marketing tactics to sell not just a product, but a political ideology to the public? And then, so he writes a book called The Engineering of Consent. Manufacturing of the opinion of the masses is an important element in the democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of the country. He writes another book called Crystallizing Consent. Another guy, Noam Chomsky, writes a book, Manufacturing Consent. Oswald Spengler said, democracy has become a weapon of the moneyed interest. It uses the media to create the illusion that there is consent to the governed. We saw this first during the Spanish-American War, and Cuba was starving people to death Spain was starving people to death in Cuba. And we were just 90 miles away, and we were not doing anything about it. And so William Randolph Hearst has his New York Journal. Joseph Pulitzer has his New York World. And so Hearst sent his illustrator, Frederick Remington, to Cuba. And they didn't have the ability to print photographs yet, so you needed an artist to draw etchings. And he says, you furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war, is what Hearst told Remington. And so this idea is that Hearst knew with his paper and so many people reading it that he could manipulate it and get the public to be upset and pressure the politicians to say, hey, we got to go down there and help these Cubans that are being starved to death by the Spain. And so the media began to realize that they had the power to sway the public, and then the public would put pressure on their politicians. And then we have fear. So in 1938, there is the radio drama War of the Worlds. We interrupt this program to announce that New Jersey is being invaded by Martians. It instantly spreads across the country. Everybody runs outside and looks up in the sky for spaceships. It was a phenomenon that you could get the entire country to instantly react. So now people will do what they see other people doing, and people will be motivated by fear. Then began to see movies that talk about manipulating people psychologically. One was Gaslighting. There was a movie in 1940s with Ingrid Bergman as the niece of a famous actress who was given jewels, but she died, and all of her acting stuff and the jewels were locked in the attic of her flat in London, and people knew about it, but she didn't want to go up in the attic because it was too emotional, and so a guy starts courting her because he wants to be able to get up into the attic, look for these jewels. And then he marries her, you know those old movies, and then he's gonna go for a walk in the evening and smoke his pipe, and he gets out down the street, climbs up the fire escape, walks across the roofs, and goes into the attic. And when he turns the gas lamp on in the attic, it gets dimmer in her bedroom. And so she says, you know, whenever you go for a walk, my light gets dimmer in my bedroom. And he's like, oh, you're seeing things. And the stress is getting to you. I think your eyes are playing tricks on you. I think we need to have you go see a psychiatrist. And then he's about to sign her into an insane asylum. And then he could look in the attic all he wants for the jewels. But somebody across the street sees, you know, whenever it turns on in the attic, it's dimmer in the bedroom, he sort of wanders over, breaks the story, and they arrest the guy. And so, but it went into our vernacular, gaslighting somebody. And this is what psychology today says. Victims of gaslighting are systematically fed false information that leads them to question what they know to be true. They end up doubting their own memory, their perception, even their sanity. So now you have not just gaslighting one person, but gaslighting of a nation by feeding them false information. But the other side realized that people will do what they see other people doing, especially if there's fear. Now, the idea of manipulating the press goes back to the ancient Greeks. They did not have a king, so you had 6,000 citizens. And how do you influence 6,000 citizens? They would get them all together in a theater, outdoors, and they would put on plays. Comedies, tragedies, satires, and they would ridicule and buffoon certain points of view in some plays, right? Aristophanes, the comedies, and then they would honor and extol other points of view. And you would leave the theater saying, oh man, I felt bad for it. I mean, it literally reads like Saturday Night Live. Living politicians they would make fun of, and everybody would laugh at him, and then everybody's filing out, and they sort of avoid the guy and everything he stood for. And then they would have a tragedy where somebody would die doing something noble, and then they would leave the theater saying, oh, I want to be remembered like that guy. And so from that time till now, theater media is always political in a country where it's the people who are making the decisions. So think of your favorite sitcom or movie or show. There's a character you identify with. They're cute, they're funny, they're the hero. And as the series goes on, this character begins to make morally compromising decisions. A little lust here, a little cheat, a little revenge, and you find yourself apologizing for them and defending them, saying, yeah, I know James Bond is with a woman he's not married to, but he's about to save the world. So can we get on with the story? And it minimizes something that used to be important to you, marital fidelity. And then they make people that hold old traditional values look like they're backwards and bumpkins and simpletons and idiots, and you turn off the show and you're like, yeah, that guy was old-fashioned, you know. And from that time till now, right? So it was seen during the first televised presidential debate. Kennedy put on makeup. Nixon did not. And the hot studio lights made Nixon look like an old man. Everybody that heard the debate on the radio said Nixon won, but everybody that saw it on TV, especially the women, said that Kennedy won. And then they realized that people, they're just going through it's an optics thing, right? So the country is controlled by laws. Laws are controlled by politicians. Politicians are controlled by voters. Voters are controlled by public opinion, and public opinion is controlled by media in the short run, education in the long run, and the church still has an effect on the public, and then the internet, because all of them use that. So whoever controls the internet, which is the way that the church and education and media use, whoever controls the internet, the church, they control the formation of public opinion, which controls the voters, which controls the votes, and which politicians get in, which controls the laws, and controls the country.
This has been a production of Our Watch with Tim Thompson. We hope you're encouraged to engage the culture around you. We want to invite you to connect with Pastor Tim by going to the Connect page on ourwatch.com. That's OUR watch.com. Until next time, This is all of us at Our Watch, reminding you to be bold, be strong, and to take back the public square.